somebody.
Of course, I didn't have a foresight enough to ask you until Friday afternoon at 5. Seconds away, the anticipation. She's gonna be here for 5 hours. You ready for 5 hours?
I thought it was off.
Red
means.
Good evening, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, and we are ready to start our pre-meeting. Ms. Sloop, Chief Hoyle, you'll be discussing the noise ordinance with us.
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So as you all know, we're here to discuss the topic of the town's noise ordinance. And I want to preface the conversation by saying that whatever the town board decides as far as any edits to the ordinance would still have to go through the proper approval process. So tonight is not the final decision in regards to any changes that may occur. Also, I wanted to let you know that really the purpose of this is to provide you with options to consider and also to let you know what other jurisdictions are doing. So the statute that provides the town with the authority to regulate noise is 160A 184. And as you can see, it's really to regulate, restrict, or prohibit the production or emission of noises or amplified speech, music, or other sounds that tend to annoy, disturb, or frighten its citizens. What do we have in our current town ordinance? Right now, we have an unreasonable or necessary noise prohibited, which aligns with the statute. And the ordinance provides examples of what constitutes unreasonable noise. However, we do not have specific decibel readings to determine when a noise is unreasonable. Rather, it's based on subjectivity as it relates to the enforcing officer. We also don't differentiate between times of day, and we do not provide any specific exemptions. Cornelius, on the other hand, prohibits the continuance of any unreasonably loud, disturbing, and excessive noise in the town, as we do, but they provide examples of what constitutes unreasonably loud noise in addition to specific decibel level limits for sound equipment at a place of public entertainment and a few other examples. Now, I will point out that they recently amended their ordinance to lower the allowed decibel limit from 90 to 85 during normal business hours and 75 to 60 overnight. One of the hardships that this town will face if we do decide to transition towards decibel readers is determining what would be the appropriate decibel level to apply, and are we going to distinguish between day and night and specific places. So in Cornelius, they also have defined normal business hours, as you can see there, and they specify as to specific days of the week. Davidson, what does Davidson do? They also use decibel readings. They break it down between day, night, specific times, residential, multifamily, and commercial and institutional. They also prohibit unreasonably loud noise in general, with certain examples given, similar to our ordinance. But then they go on to, as well, provide specific exceptions to noise created by sporting events, weddings, sponsored recreational activities, emergency activities, etc. Chapel Hill. They provide 2 ways to measure sound levels and then provide a maximum decibel level for sound when measured at the property boundary. That is something else that the town will need to consider, is if we transition over to decibel readings, where will the reading be taken? Will it be taken where the person's occupancy is, meaning, if it's their apartment, inside their apartment? Is it going to be at the property boundary? Is it going to be somewhere else? Those are all things that we would have to consider. So Chapel Hill also has permitted, their sound level permitted differs between daytime, nighttime, They prohibit unreasonably loud noise as a nuisance noise. They have the specific exceptions for outdoor athletic events, emergency sounds, and normal operations. And they actually offer a permit to be applied for to exceed noise limits for a specific duration. This is usually for specific special events. Concord. There's, again, a general prohibition on unreasonably loud noise, and they provide factors for determining when sound is unreasonably loud. Concord's ordinance is probably the most similar to the town's ordinance as it currently is written. They provide exemptions such as outdoor events, outdoor school activities, emergency noises, railroad operations, and others, and they allow for a noise permit to use to amplify certain sound devices. Raleigh. Raleigh provides for a maximum decibel level depending on the time of day and the zoning district. They also provide exceptions, including lawn care equipment during daytime hours, parades, sporting events, construction equipment, emergency work, and others. They provide a general prohibition, as we do, on unreasonably loud noise. They do state examples of unreasonably loud noise, as we do. Charlotte. General prohibition on unreasonably loud noise, which is pretty much seen across the board as we do, provides factors to consider when noise is unreasonably loud, specific prohibitions in residential areas during certain times of the day, such as construction work, lawnmowers, and others, prohibits sound amplification registering more than a set number of decibel levels during certain times of the day. Again, we have not yet reached out to any of the jurisdictions to determine how they set their decibel limitations, meaning if, for example, they say, okay, only 75 decibels, we don't know how they made that determination. We do not know if they engaged an expert to help set those levels, but that would be part of the research if we are instructed to transition to a decibel reader. Charlotte also allows for a permit for additional sound amplification and has exceptions for music as commercial establishments or outdoor music facilities. So I know that was pretty quick, but here is a chart summarizing all of that. And as you can see, Huntersville, out of all of the different columns there, we do not have decibel measurement, we do not have daytime differences, we do not have exceptions for certain activities, and we do not have permits for exceeding noise. So all of the other jurisdictions that we surveyed at least have some of these aspects, and many of them overlap, including what they offer specific exemptions for. And those specific exemptions are included in the proposed edits. Of course, we could tweak them depending on what the board decides, but we are recommending exemptions regardless of whether we stick with a reasonable standard, which is what we have now, or if we transition over to decibel readings. So what are some of the pros and cons of a decibel standard? A pro would obviously be that it would provide for an objective application of the ordinance. We're taking subjectivity out of it. The potential is also to streamline noise ordinance citation process. If you don't have to use a subjective standard, it's pretty black and white as to whether or not you meet the decibel limit. Cons. It could be difficult to determine the appropriate decibel standard to apply without expert knowledge. It may result in increased costs for equipment, maintenance of the equipment, and training to use the equipment. We have not yet pursued any type of quotes for these costs, but if the town board does want to move in this direction, obviously that would be something to factor in, and we would get quotes for consideration. The results may also be difficult to decipher, and that could just be based on lack of experience. This may be a hurdle that we could overcome once the officers are able to get familiarized with the equipment and learn how to use it. But it's definitely going to be a learning curve on the front end. Also, one of the factors to consider is that the decibel readers may produce inaccurate readings, and what factors into that is that there is a lot of ambient noise. Chief can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can, but as you can see on this slide, they actually have gone out and done some testing. And they tested a decibel reader during a football game. They went to 7 different intersections near the stadium to test the noise level. And the average level at the intersections was between 60 to 65, lowest 55, and highest 75. but it wasn't clear as to whether the results were from a spike in noise from the actual football game or if it was from a nearby ambient noise. And I don't know if you want to provide any examples of what that might be.
Well, I'll give you one example. Is we were at an intersection where we could not hear. There was a ball game going on. We made sure the ball game was happening, and we went to one intersection where they could not hear the stadium noise, and the traffic was light through the intersection, and the reading was 70 to 75. I think they took 3 readings, and you couldn't hear any noise from the ball game. From the PVA of the ball game, the reading was 60 to 65, and they could hear the band playing. That's some of the notes that they sent with us. So I look at that and I think, well, that doesn't give me really anything definitive. Now, let me say this. We went and bought a $300 decibel meter off Amazon to test. They go from $50 to $5,000. Maybe I don't have the right piece of equipment, but I worry. I'm not anti-decibel at all. As a matter of fact, decibel meters help the officer not get involved in the subjective side of it, right? But I can tell you some problems out there need the officer to be involved in the subjective side of it. You know, it's like it's a community problem. And I'll give you a good example. We had officers going out and they would say, yeah, I can hear the band, I can hear the announcer, but it's a ball game. And I think our question has to be, do you want the officer making that assessment? You know, another officer may go out there and say, I don't care if it is a ball game, it's too loud. You know, but the same night, same ball game, another officer could go out there and say, it's a ball game going on. How do you stop the noise coming from a ball game? That's the bad side of the subjective side, because, you know, the standard we use, and we use the same standard everywhere. It's a use of force standard. It came from Graham versus Connor. It's the reasonable person standard. Would a reasonable person of normal faculties feel like that's a violation or not? It's not the person that's complaining that's mad, and it's not the person in the stadium that has maybe a business that has a monetary benefit to play the music. It's what would a reasonable person think that was detached from it? Would they say it's too loud? We use that standard on everything. We use it when we run radar in the cars. You know, a lot of people think we just turn on a radar unit and it gives us a speed and we write you a ticket. It's not the way it works. The officer has to use an estimation to judge the speed and verify it with the radar. It's just, you know, that's just kind of the standard we use. And it works for us in many different situations that I don't know whether the decibel meter will. If we go out there and it's high, if it spikes high, do we write them a ticket no matter what? Or is the officer still going to use some subjectivity, right? So it really comes down to whatever y'all decide to do, we're good with. I'm not 100% sure decibel meters is going to solve the noise issue, you know, in all situations.
So I'll just move us along then to the next slide, which is where we have some recommendations. And those recommendations would be to include exceptions for certain activities and businesses in the ordinance. And part of the reason for that is certain types of activities, they may, if you were to apply a decibel standard or even a reasonableness standard, they may be in violation at a specific moment in time. And so let's say that we issued a notice of violation. Well, then the very next day, possibly even the very next 30 minutes to an hour, they're no longer in violation. So it's a circular citation process because they are continuing to receive only at very specific times notices of violation, but then they're no longer in violation, so we don't continue to issue additional violations, if that makes sense. So for example, football games have come up quite often. So on the night of a football game, they may be in violation temporarily, even if only for 10 to 15 minutes. And depending on the officer that goes out, based on a reasonableness standard of a reasonable person, may or may not consider them to be in violation. But let's say that on that particular instance they do. Then if they go out 2 weeks later, they may not. But always after the football game has ended the next day, the noise that caused them to be in violation is not occurring at that time. So that's why for specific activities, we are recommending whether you stick with a reasonableness standard or move towards a decibel reader, that you include exceptions for certain activities. We are also recommending that if you do include certain exceptions into the ordinance, that we specify whether that exception applies at all times or only certain times of the day, and whether or not it applies differently in residential areas. Before implementing a decibel standard, we would also recommend quantifying the estimated cost associated with transitioning to decibel standards, and that may be anywhere from the training cost to the equipment cost to maintenance cost to any type of special storage cost. Those are things that we just don't have the information on as of yet. We also are recommending that we do a little bit more testing. We determine if implementing decibel standards will have the desired effect, as Chief stated. So whether that's 5 to 10 different testing sites or how often we do it, that would be a question for you all and also the chief and his staff, depending on staffing levels and our ability to test. But also not just field testing, but actually reaching out to some of these jurisdictions to determine whether or not when they transitioned over to decibel readings, if it actually had the effect that they wanted it to have. Or did they experience detriments? What were those? And just really the overall success in transitioning over from reasonable to decibel. And with that, I'll open the floor to any questions. I know that that was very quick, but really this was just meant to be an overview. And as I mentioned, the proposed edits that were provided are not set in stone. Those are just options for you to consider.
Okay, so the chair will open it up for questions. Commissioner Phillips?
I mean, this will probably be something you have to get me later, Chief, but I was wondering how many calls y'all are getting about a year over noise? Because what I'm concerned about maybe is this is a solution looking for a problem.
Well, it could be, it depends on the topic, really. We don't get a lot of noise complaints, I'll tell you that. But when we get them, it's at one location, it's a specific thing. I'm going to talk about the elephant room, CSD. We get a lot of noise complaints from CSD, and we're not going to solve that problem, I can tell you. You can't write 1,000 spectators a ticket for screaming at a ball game. I mean, I don't think y'all want to go there. I know I don't want to go there. And that, if you go out there, and I went out there late last week, and, the parking lot, the stadium is right on top of houses. And you're just not going to solve that problem. If you exempt sporting events and you exempt some of the business stuff that Emily's recommended, it will cut our noise complaints probably by 90%. The rest of our noise complaints involve barking dogs, people having parties, and officers, you're not going to be able to use a decibel meter for that. You've got to go out there and, you know what's going to happen with a decibel meter on barking dogs. It's going to, the officer has to go out there and you need to get your dog in, your dog's barking, and you need to turn the music down and things like that. And we usually give 1 or 2 warnings before we write a ticket anyway. So, but we don't have a lot of noise complaints other than those special event type complaints. And then mainly it's complaints without a solution, Now, I will say that there's times when we went out, not just that school, but other locations, where there was an issue with the PA speaker being too loud, for example. We met with them, we got them to redirect their speakers downward toward the field and not have them so far up, and that helped. But a combination of speakers and bands and cheering crowds is, especially on a competitive ball game, it's not just a CSD problem. It's you can hear it at Hopewell, you can hear it everywhere. We're just not getting complaints from those locations. So to answer your question, noise is not a big problem, but it's a consistent problem. It's small volume, but consistent, as you would expect in a busy community. That answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, Commissioner Kidwell?
Yeah, Chief, you said 7 intersections? What intersections? I knew you'd have that ready.
Gotcha. We actually did more. This is just around CSD. We also went down to Hopewell that same night. But so Macular Road, did I say that right?
McElwain?
Yes. Decimal reading, now, we took some readings not at school, too. We were trying to measure everything. So could hear announcements, the 60 to 65 decibels. Beatty's Ford and Bud Henderson, 70 decibels. Light traffic, no noise from the stadium. Bud Henderson and Carrington Ridge, 65 decibels, little to no noise heard. So that would probably be a good ambient noise reading if he didn't hear
During a
it
game?
Huh?
Is that during a game?
During a game.
So, I live in Carrington Ridge,
I'm aware.
and I'm a quarter mile as the crow flies. And I can hear them in my backyard while I'm playing music on a speaker, over the speaker. So ambient, say 65 or 50 to 60 at my house on the backyard fire pit. There's a football game going, and I can hear them clear as day.
Right. Well, here's another example. In the parking lot of the stadium, 70 to 75 decibel reading, 3 readings. No music, but could hear the cheering crowds. So that was without the PA. You know, it's all point in time when you mash that button. You know, is it crowd cheering, or they're not cheering? Is the band playing, or they're not playing? And out on Beatty's Ford Road was 65, no noise from the stadium. So, I mean, it's really, to me, and again, the decimal meter, I may not have the right piece of equipment. I got a nice one.
You did for $300, I know you did.
Yeah, I got a nice one, but, you know, I don't know whether that tells me anything, just as he's saying. You know, we read 65 in the parking lot, but people can hear it. I will say that night, we didn't get any complaints from anybody about it.
And this is after they've tilted the,
Yes, it was after we tilted the speakers down. So there's some more review to be done. I mean, typically an officer would go out there, and I can tell you, it'd be very difficult for an officer to enforce a noise ordinance on a ball game. It's just, there's not a target. You know, there's not a person responsible. You got 1,000 people responsible for that noise, and it's very difficult. But that's a one-off thing. You know, it's not like we have that problem all over town.
Any other questions?
not right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Any other questions? Commissioner Munger?
I don't know if you know this stuff, but obviously, culmination of a football is probably the loudest portion. Do you know what time games typically end?
Around 10 o'clock. You talking about ball games? Talking about ball
Yeah,
games?
I'll ask that again because I wasn't on mic, I wasn't paying attention. So games, at the end of the game is usually the exciting, loud portion. Can you tell me approximately what time football games end?
Around 10 o'clock, but it can be loud at the very beginning, too. That's when all the excitement is, and, you know, it's usually consistent noise all the way through the game.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking loud at 6:37, loud at 10, 10:30, 11.
I think that's a great
might
point
be a little
Emily
more.
made. We really need to think about timeframes there.
When we talk about exemptions, and this might be an Emily question, hypothetically, if we talked about doing an exemption for sporting events such as this, is that just cap off, they hit 120, 138 decibels, all good, or is there a happy medium in there somewhere?
So it depends on whether or not you set a decibel level for the exemption, or whether or not just that particular activity is exempted. But we have the ability to set parameters for the exemptions. It would just be whatever the town board wanted us to look at and consider.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have for now.
Commissioner Boone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a couple of questions, Chief. High school football games are a pretty exciting time of everybody's life, but what I'm hearing is the guy that's worked all day and he comes home and it's 7 o'clock and he's ready to go to bed about 9 o'clock and he's hearing the whole football game. I don't know what Commissioner Kidwell said. That's what I'm dealing with. But I think that the one that I hear more than football games are these, I call them bumblebee cars around town, and especially at Burkdale Village. I mean, that's a problem.
Yeah.
How do we handle something like that?
Well, we can, we can cover it under our ordinances. We can write them tickets and things like that. A lot, difficulty with that is they're mobile. They're moving. And we've got to hear them. We've got to write them citations for that. That's more difficult. But of all the noise complaints that we talk about, that's the one that gets me the most.
There you go.
It's very rude. It's very, especially the bass thumpers and the, you can't even hardly think when they're behind you.
Are we talking town citation or state citation when we're talking writing tickets?
Well, we're specifically talking about the town's noise ordinance.
So that's a
Specifically.
town citation.
If issued under this town noise ordinance, yes. It would be,
Just FYI, Major Graham is the judge of those citations. The other thing is, I don't want to see the officers having to wear something else on their tool belt that has to measure decibels. I don't think that's the avenue.
Yeah, they would be, we probably have 4 of those, one assigned to each shift.
Okay,
There would be a little bit of maneuvering around to make sure the decimal meter gets to the location that's complained about, but they wouldn't have to carry it.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Partee?
How you doing, Chief, today? Just a quick question, maybe 2. Saturday Night Lights and Friday Night Lights is part of our culture, football. The Community School of Davidson Stadium, that's ground zero for all this debate right now. Prior to their inaugural football season, Community School of Davidson, and building up that stadium, how many complaints have we had in the past from other schools regarding noise from games or events?
I asked staff that question, and I haven't looked it up, I hadn't pulled the numbers, but they don't recall any other noise complaints from any sporting.
Sporting events? Okay, great, thank you. That's my question.
Commissioner Kovacs, did you have a question? Does anyone else?
No,
Commissioner Kidwell?
actually, just Janet, and as we dive into this deeper as a board, I've done some research and looked around the state on my own of what other municipalities are doing, randomly put it in a spreadsheet, kind of condensed it down, thrown some numbers, including what other municipalities are using as fines, like Wake Forest, Greensboro, larger communities like ours. If you could at some point, oh, you can't hear me? Sorry. If you could at some point, just take this and disseminate this to the rest of the board for their consideration. Sorry about that, I had the mic off.
Okay.
Shame on me.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you both very much for sharing the information that you found, all the research that you found, and we will, I believe we'll have additional conversations at retreat. Is that correct, Mr. Roberts?
I hadn't used it in a while either. Yes, we will have it at the retreat and try to seek some feedback from the board. And that feedback may be, leave it alone, it may be whatever it is. But yes, we will be trying to seek some feedback to see where we go.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
one thing, if I may,
Yes.
Madam Mayor, is you also saw in the materials that we provided you with some proposed edits to the special events permitting ordinance, and those are likely edits that, regardless of whether or not we change or leave alone the town noise ordinance, that we would be suggesting that the town board consider, and that is because we want to align it with what our current process actually is. So if you all have any questions regarding that, I'm sure we can discuss it further at the retreat. That just wasn't something that actually came up in the PowerPoint. So I wanted to put it on your radar that that's something that the legal staff would likely be asking that the town board consider in the upcoming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, with that, it is 5:29, and we will come back at 6 o'clock for the regular board meeting. Thank you all.